Hey readers, welcome back to Reading Realm. Cosmos is here for the first time in a little while. He is napping on the bed over there, but that's an exciting update number one. Exciting update number two, on Wednesday of this week, I adopted two kittens. They are 3 weeks old, or 3 months old, not 3 weeks. Um, but they're very, very cute and sweet, and they're currently shut in a bathroom, acclimating to everything and getting used to the smell of Cosmos and the smell of the house and everything. And they are bonded brothers, so I got both of them. They're very, very sweet, and I'm excited, and I'm hoping that introducing them to Cosmos will go well. He gets along well with other cats. But if you want to see more about those kittens, I am posting about it on my new channel, Autistic Adventures, which I'll link below. If you want to go check that out, I'm making videos about them and shorts about them. So I'm very excited. And also, speaking of autism, that leads me to today's review, which is Autism for Adults. This book is by Daniel M. Jones, who also makes social media content about autism and kind of advocacy stuff. And I think overall I really liked this book. I thought it was really insightful. This is one of the few that I've read where it is directly targeting the reader as being the autistic one. Some of the other ones I've read are more like generally, here's autism. You may be a parent, you may be an autistic person, we don't know exactly what you are, but someone is autistic, which is making you read this book. This one is very much like you, the autistic person, reading it, which is definitely interesting. I will say I have a few issues with this book. I think overall it's very good. I think there's some really good insightful things, some kind of positive like enforcement things where it's basically like, yeah, people will struggle with this, but you can still do it kind of thing. The one thing that I will say, I did have two things that I feel like I did have a little bit of an issue with in this book was there were a lot of times where it was just sort of like a blanket statement of, this is the autistic experience, and of course you relate to that as an autistic person. And I think it's kind of not acknowledging autistic people who may have a whole range of experiences and a whole spectrum of challenges, that some people will struggle with something a lot more than someone else will with the same thing, even if they're all autistic. Because there were some things where it was like, well, of course you understand struggling with this because you're autistic. Or of course you like this because you're autistic. And it's like, that's not my experience with it. And I think I have read other books where it's done a much better job of, this is a common thing that a lot of autistic people experience, but not everyone does. And this book didn't really do that as much. It was kind of more like, this is how autistic people are. And some of those blanket statements did not apply to me, although I know that they are true for many, many autistic people. So, that was one thing where it's like, overall, I feel like a lot of the information was good, and it's pretty minor, but there were just a few moments where it was like, you understand what I'm talking about because you're also autistic, and it's like, well, actually, not quite. But overall, I think the messages were good. The one other issue that I did have is there's a section where it talks specifically about masking and whether that's good or not, and basically explains what masking is. So for anyone who may not be autistic and may not know what that is, it's basically when an autistic person tries to suppress autistic behaviors to fit into a situation that they may be in. And I feel like his explanation of it kind of glossed over a lot of really important issues with masking. And he said that he had talked to many autistic people on a thing that he does on his social media where he does like live streams to discuss whether people who are autistic think masking is good or bad. But his explanation of it was basically like, you play a character to fit into a situation, which I think on one hand isn't entirely wrong, but I feel like it's also kind of understating what it is, because as a theater major and a person who has acted since I was 14 and done a lot of performance where I am playing a character, I can say with 100% confidence that is not the same thing as acting, that is not the same thing as masking, because for me at least, acting is putting forward a different character that I can embody, and masking is an active suppression of parts of myself. And I think that's the part I wish he had touched on more, because masking can be extremely harmful if it's done too much, because you are actively suppressing behaviors or stims or things you might want to say that feel more natural to you to conform to the expectation of the situation that you're in. And over time that can be really, really exhausting, and can also kind of give people a difficult time figuring out their own identity if they are constantly living with a mask. And so in this book, I don't think he really reached a conclusion of whether it's a negative or positive thing. I think he was basically saying there are times it can be useful. And I don't disagree with that, but I do think he should have acknowledged more ways it can be harmful, and also that an autistic person being in a situation where they have to mask can be so draining for them. And I don't feel like that was discussed very much. But I do think that there was a lot of good stuff in here. And this is specifically Autism for Adults, so it does talk a little bit about, like, school and sort of younger years in the sense of, like, understanding what makes you into the adult you are, but mostly it focuses more on how to deal with being autistic as an adult, because a lot of times there is no support for adults. Once an autistic person becomes 18, there's a lot less access to resources or anything like that. And this person is not from the US, so some of what he talks about in terms of things that he's been working on or activism he's doing is done in Europe. And I know it seems like they have a lot of work to do too. The US absolutely has a ton of work to do for autistic people, and especially right now, the situation is not good, and there's so much stigma and misinformation, and so it's kind of nice to have a resource like this, even though there are parts I slightly disagree with. Like I said, I also will say, I think certain parts I wished that certain chapters had been longer and certain others had been maybe not quite as long, just because I feel like some of the things that I personally was wondering about were shorter, and then some of the things I'd already kind of figured out for myself were longer. But the chapters are Family and Childhood, the Fun and Sad Truth About Autistic Family Life, Friendship in You, How You Can Make Friends Even If You Think You Can't, Dating on the Spectrum, Can Autistic People Fall in Love, School Life, What You Need to Know to Hack Academia, Before Your Diagnosis, What I Learned at School and How You Can Avoid the Same Issues Being Undiagnosed, Autism in the Workplace, Revealing the Honest Truth About Autistic Employment, Special Interests, Using Your Autistic Brain to Manage Your Life, and Your Future, Making a Solid Plan to Support Your Needs. I will say, I do feel like the part on special interests also I had a little bit of an issue with. I think, and again, I don't know this person, so I can't say for sure, but it seems like he's speaking from personal experience, which I think this is the case for many autistic people, but he refers to special interests as being basically coming from a place of autistic people liking to problem solve. So he mentions having an interest in specifically 9/11 and sort of like figuring out certain things that don't add up to try and solve it, or like kind of figure out a mystery basically as what special interests are, and they come from problem solving. That is not the case for me at all, and I'm sure that it is for some people, but for me, special interests come more from a thing that I feel like it can connect to and relate to in a way that makes me either really passionate about it or feel safe in that thing. Like, for me, it's not about problem solving. One of my really big special interests that I think I've mentioned on this channel before is Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And for me, that has nothing to do with problem solving. For me, has to do with being able to get lost in that world and feeling a connection to characters and really wanting to know the lore and understand the world, because to me, I love fantasy and I want to get into everything, and that is where it comes from for me, is more like, this is a special interest because this series can be like a safe place for me or something that I can connect to, and that now that I really enjoy it, I want to get into everything about it. So I do think that's another place where sort of generalizing that special interests come from needing to problem solve, that is not my experience at all. And I think that's kind of sort of probably coming from the same thing of all autistic people experience this and some people don't. But from his experience or what he's seen as he's writing this, he thinks that is how it is. For me, it's not. And I think that's also really interesting because he refers to special interests as sometimes being called obsessive interests, which for me, I would hate having my special interest called that, because throughout middle school especially and high school, when I would get really passionate about a special interest, which I didn't know that was what it was at the time because I was recently diagnosed and didn't really know anything about it yet, I would basically be mocked by either classmates or sometimes even members of my family would kind of be like, oh, you're so obsessed with this thing. Like, why are you so obsessed with it? Like, we asked how your day was and all you want to talk about is this fictional thing. And for me, that made me feel really unsafe to talk about my special interests in front of people. Like, even now, it's like, I'll mention Tolkien. That was my second to last special interest. I'm not going to mention what my current one is right now just because so many people have made fun of me for what my special interests are in the past. And Tolkien is one where I feel like enough people either also really like it or at least respect it, that it's like, I can talk about this. But certain other things, it's like, it's harder for me to be open about, like, this is the thing that I will talk about for 10 hours if you let me, just because people have made fun of it. And I think if they knew now, like, this is a special interest that is an autistic thing, they probably wouldn't have had the same reaction, but they still did have that reaction. And that's another reason why I feel like people need to be more educated about what can be autistic symptoms, because I feel like there's so many times where someone's like, I'd never bully an autistic person, and it's like, okay, but you make fun of this person for being really shy, or you make fun of this person for really liking this one specific thing, or you make fun of this other person for having inappropriately long eye contact or no eye contact, or not talking enough, talking too much, and all of those can be traits of autism. So I think that this book is definitely helpful in some ways. I think there are things where if you are autistic and you don't really know anything about it yet and you're just starting to look into understanding it, I would say this is maybe not the book to start with. Just for me, I feel like if this had been what I started with when I was teaching myself about it, there would be things in here where it would have kind of made me doubt my diagnosis if I didn't know that things were actually autistic, the way this person was like, all autistic people experience this, and this is what this is. And for me, I didn't connect to some of those things. I feel like if that was the very first thing I'd started learning about, it would have been a little bit like, am I? Like, that, all autistic people feel this, but I don't, is that a problem? So I think that there are other resources that might be a little bit more written in a way where it's like, many people experience this, but not all do, and that's okay. I think one that I reviewed last year, I think, Connecting with the Autism Spectrum. That one is very good, and it's also written both for people in an autistic person's life as well as the autistic person themselves. Also, this one, which I happen to have with me, Sincerely Your Autistic Child. I'm still working on reading it, but so far, it has a bunch of different people's perspectives, so that way you can get the experience of the people who do have a special interest that is about problem solving, like they're obsessed with mystery or true crime or something where they're like, I need to get to the bottom of this. And then you also have the autistic people who are like, I really like collecting vintage Beanie Babies or something. I don't know. But I think it overall is a really good book. Other than the couple issues that I mentioned, I think it's definitely helpful in certain parts, and especially parts where he talks about struggling with jobs and finding work, and how it took him a while to figure out sort of what he could succeed at in terms of like a professional income supporting job, because he talked about how he did one job and he did it for one day and was like, this doesn't work, I quit. And I think that that can be a little bit validating, because I feel like a lot of times autistic people can feel like, if I don't succeed at this one specific job, it means I won't be able to succeed at any job. And I think he did a good job of expressing, you just have to try things and maybe take on an internship, maybe do some other kind of thing to get experience to see whether something's a fit, and then from there be able to go into a job that you can actually succeed in, which I think is helpful. But yeah, I think overall I think it is a good resource and a good book. Again, I wish certain things had not been quite so generalized, or like blanket statement, this is how everything is. And I also feel like masking and how detrimental that can be was very much glossed over. And I think he was trying to make the point of, it can be a useful tool, and it is, but it's not a harmless tool, I would say. So, and maybe some people can mask all the time and it doesn't make them completely drained or anything. Like I said, I can't blanket statement say that every single autistic person is damaged or exhausted by masking too much. But I know for a lot of people, if you constantly have to have a mask, it is so draining, and it also just makes you feel more like your authentic self is not the person that would be accepted if you feel like you always have to be wearing a mask to fit in or be in a social situation. So I think that is something that I really wish he had acknowledged more, because there really was not much mention about that aspect of it. But overall, I do think it's a good resource. I think a couple things in here do apply a little bit more to like high school, middle school age stuff, even though this is called Autism for Adults. But overall, I do think that a lot of it is helpful. And also just, there's a lot of talk about learning about yourself and your triggers or your needs or how to advocate for yourself and stuff. And I think those are all really, really good points, because if you know what causes a certain problem, you can figure out ways to either avoid it or recover from it. Like he talked about how school was really rough, but he would come home and play music, and that was kind of like his way of recovering from the difficult school day and stuff. So overall, I think maybe don't use this as your absolute first resource if you're new to learning about autism, but maybe if you feel like you know enough that you feel like you know what you relate to or don't relate to, and that it's okay to not relate to something that someone implies everyone does if they're autistic, then this is a good resource. And I have not actually checked out any of his social media at all, but he does have a YouTube channel called Aspie World, and I think a website as well, and also Instagram, where he apparently posts resources for autistic people and does work kind of connecting with people who are autistic and sort of trying to uplift other people's experiences and do advocacy work. He did some work talking to various organizations to try and get more autistic rights and stuff. So I do think overall, like, what he's doing is a good thing and should be supported. And also, the person who reviewed or like wrote this comment up here is Temple Grandin, who I have one of her books behind me here to read this year as well, and she's kind of known as basically one of the first people to write an autistic autobiography. So I think that's kind of cool. She says, Daniel Jones's Aspie World videos are highly recommended for adults who get diagnosed later in life. So I think definitely this is a good resource. It's hard to say I enjoyed some of these autistic books because sometimes they can be really hard to read in certain ways, but I think I enjoyed it in terms of there was some really good insight and some good validation and stuff in here. So if you are autistic, this could be a good book. It's also short. It's only like 112 or something pages, and then there's a glossary of terms as well. And this person also has ADHD as well, which I also have. So ADHD is like the first entry in the glossary, but it includes like certain terms and what those mean, which I think is always helpful. And so it's not a huge commitment to read compared to some books that are a lot thicker and a lot more word-packed than this. So ultimately, I do recommend it if it seems like something that could be helpful for people. Also, he keeps talking about how science is his special interest, and I think that that is true. But also the way he talks about Star Wars in this. I think Star Wars might have been one of his first or early special interests, even if it isn't currently. Which I don't know if that one would necessarily be a problem-solving one, but I definitely do think that it is an interesting book, and especially the way this is targeted specifically at the autistic reader versus just autism for a general audience kind of thing. It is definitely different. But with that being said, I'm going to leave this here. I've talked for so long about this because I feel like there's a lot to say, both directly related to the book and otherwise. But once again, let me know in the comments if you've read this or if you would be interested to read it, or let me know what you're reading. I also wanted to say I did the math to see how many books I need to read per month to reach my reading list goal by the end of the year for all of them. And it's 3.5 books per month is how that works. And this is the 3rd book I've finished this year, so I feel like I'm on track, which is very exciting. But with that, thank you all for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. It would really help me out. And keep reading. Bye!